Hello and welcome to Tempo Afrique TV, the program Headlines. My name is Ken Wanaku, and we are here today with Petros Haile, and we're trying to get into the details of liberation movements in Africa. And as a citizen of AMBAZONIA in the sub-region of the Gulf, from the country called Cameroons, there is currently going on now a case of genocide, where citizens are being massacred, murdered, butchered by a government regime that is unable to solve the problems of the people. So in trying to find ways and means to stop the violence, the unnecessary violence, we are reaching out to our African brothers and sisters everywhere on the continent, especially those who have gone through similar situations in the past. And luckily for us, we have our brother Petros Haile, who is Eritrean, but born in Ethiopia, and so he's kind of inside the kitchen of everything that happened in Eritrea and Ethiopia leading up to the independence of Eritrea. And currently, there is also a reconciliation effort that is going on between Ethiopians and Eritreans, which is excellent for all Africans. But not to go too fast, let's begin with our questions to Petros Haile, who will give us a background of these events. Welcome, Petros.
Welcome.
And as I said in my opener, you are Eritrean, but it will be better for you to really tell our audience who is Petros.
Petros, thank you. I am Eritrean, born and raised in Ethiopia till I was 15 or 16. Okay. Then I left Ethiopia during the turbulent times, commonly known as the Red Terror era. Then I went to Eritrea for a few months. Then I left to Sudan as a refugee. I spent over a year. And from there to Italy, from Italy to Minnesota. And once I'm here in Minnesota, I've been here for the last almost 35 plus years.
Wow.
I know, it seems too long, yeah?
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty much that's how I came to this country. And I'm an Eritrean, was born and raised in Ethiopia.
So we would like to unmask some of the little-known aspects as well as similarities between the Eritrea-Ethiopia war and the now pro-independence struggle of what we call AMBAZONIA, which is actually the English-speaking zone of the Cameroons. So we would like for you to explain or tell us what you see as similarities between the two, between what Eritrea was going through with Ethiopia and what AMBAZONIA is going through now with the government of Franco-Cameroon.
Okay, to begin with, let me say something about Eritrea.
Right.
Then, as a little knowledge that I have about Cameroon, I'll try to say something about it. But the commonality is they both problem or supposedly solution created by the United Nations. In Eritrean case, it was during the Second World War. Once the Second World War was over, the British defeated the Italians in that part of the region. Then they actually, from 1950 to 1940s, the British are the ones who administer Eritrea. So those are the days where the United Nations was interested on Eritrea, and it's commonly known as the disposal of Eritrea, meaning the 3 Italian colonies in that region, which is Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia. When Somalia and Libya were granted their independence, after, I believe after 10 years of protectorship, but Eritrea left behind because the monarch in Ethiopia claims, because of historical and ethnic connection, and actually that is a cover, but the main reason is they wanted to have access to a sea. So because of that, the United Nations got involved. Ethiopia's claim was considered. The U.S. Was an ally of Ethiopia at that time. So pretty much in the midst of all this, Eritrea's case was handled by United Nations unfairly, but I'll get into it later on.
Yes. So thank you for explaining why, how the emperor tried to snatch Eritrea because of access to the sea. That's really important for people to understand. And now I'll go to our next question, which is, which really comes back home to the Cameroons. Ethiopians and Eritreans are very close people. Let's say they are like brothers and sisters. So Cameroon has the same argument about AMBAZONIA. They say, oh, people who are west or east of the Mongo, which is a river that flows on the border between Cameroon and between English Cameroon and French Cameroon, they say they are like brothers and sisters. But knowing what you know about the cost of the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia, is considering a neighboring people, brothers and sisters, enough to force them to live in the same country, even if it is proven that there is no compatibility?
Yep. Well, the thing is, we have to go back to the Berlin Conference, 1885. 1885, 1884.
Yeah.
The colonialist intention to occupy or to partition Africa was strictly on the basis of economic resource. So they did not consider ethnicity, religion, or what have you. As a result of that, if you really look at the African as a continent and the colonial subjects, lack of a better term, they were not divided on the basis of ethnic harmony or the same ethnic group in one place. So they went there primarily for their economic interest, so they divided Africa, or they partitioned Africa on that basis. The problem is, once you develop 60 years, 100 years, 150 years under a different rulers, on this case, the Italians on the Horn of Africa, the Belgians, the French, the British. So in one country alone, take Ethiopia for example, you find the Somalis in Ethiopia, they call them Somali Ethiopians. You find Afars from Djibouti as well as in Ethiopia, including Eritrea, the Oromos in Kenya and Ethiopia. So that country cannot declare this ethnic group belongs to me. You can find them in Kenya, you can find them in Djibouti, you can find them in Ethiopia or Eritrea. So the Eritrean Afar identify himself or herself as an Eritrean, primarily. But that ethnic relation across the board is always there. The same in Cameroon. The AMBAZONIA, you might find them in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was one of the UN proposal for AMBAZONIA to join the Nigeria, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yes, are we brothers and sisters? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with identifying with your neighbor as brothers and sisters. But culturally, psychologically, in terms of sovereignty, you belong to another nation.
Yes.
Your nationalism or your sovereign understanding grew up together.
Yeah.
As the 9 ethnic groups in Eritrea, 86 in Ethiopia, So they all, I'm not sure how many
in the Cameroons. I think there's a combined about 200 and something.
Yeah, the 200. I'm sure some of them related to Ghana, Ivory Coast and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But when you talk about the country Cameroon, with the difference between the southern part of Cameroon, the rest of them, you have ethnic groups that comes from or belongs to 2 or 3 African countries.
Yes.
So the brotherly and sisterly definition is good to identify your neighbor as a brother and sister. But when you talk about a nation, a nation building or a country, that is a different story.
That's a different. So what, in your opinion, forced Eritreans to turn to arms?
The Eritreans turned to arms. You're talking about the liberation movement.
Yeah.
Because of the disappointment, because of the UN negligence. There's many factors.
Yeah.
But the main one is once they have that treaty or agreement on a federation between Ethiopia and Eritrea, although even the federation itself was not fair and balanced, but some Eritreans accepted it as a compromise, I believe. So even that federation that lasted between 1952 to 1961 has been violated by the Emperor of Ethiopia many times. And
similar situation in AMBAZONIA.
In AMBAZONIA, yeah.
So we came into the Union as a federation in 1961.
Yeah.
And then from 1972, the things started changing.
Yep.
They changed the federation to something like just one.
In fact, that is strikingly similar with Eritrea. Yeah. And from my understanding is the federation was not the first choice for the Ambazonian people.
No.
In fact, the same day, the UN resolution was for independence.
Yes.
But that same day, it has been converted into a federation. Yeah, but you still accepted it as a functional proposal.
Yeah.
For the same in Eritrea. The reason is since that federation from 1952 to 61, in between, there was lots of violation was going on, including the language issue. Like the Eritrean language, I would say recommended by United Nations, was Tigrinya and Arabic. Those were being replaced by the official Ethiopian language. And I believe the same thing in French, British, Those were the ones, and at the end, Haile Selassie, who was the monarch, incorporated Eritrea as one of the 14 provinces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that same thing happened. AMBAZONIA was brought into the Cameroons, and then after a while, they broke up AMBAZONIA into 2 provinces.
Oh, they
just exactly what you're saying.
Yep, they did that, and all that sovereignty granted by the United Nations was revoked.
Yeah.
And that is, although the Eritrean delegates came to New York and complained about what was going on, but at that time, the U.S. was on the side of Ethiopia. And the United Nations was pretty much dominated by were influenced by those big powers, and they just ignored Eritrean demand. So when the emperor, on the final day, when he cut the ribbon and incorporated Eritrea, and all that peaceful peaceful resistance could not take them anywhere. So that's why they started the armed struggle. And in addition to that, there was imprisonment, harassing the politicians. Eritreans were suffering within that 10 years.
Same thing in Cameroon. Right now, the former challenger to the presidency in the Cameroons, he's in prison now. The elections just finished like a number of weeks ago, and the person who was challenging the president of Cameroon is in jail.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
It's true, it's true.
Africa is crazy. Excuse me. So, but let's continue. So, war is dirty, it's bloody, it's tragic, nobody should actually look for war. But the thing is that it's, but given that Ethiopia was a bigger country than Eritrea, and it had like a strong military force, and but then they had to fight for a long, long time with Eritrea. Why couldn't they just get Eritrea in like 2 or 3 days? Do you have some advice to give, like the government of Cameroon, which is, it has its big army and it's like just shooting down on people, some of them who have no guns, nothing. It's continuously killing Ambazonians. Do you have some advice for that government? Because they are behaving exactly like the government of Ethiopia.
Well, if you're pursuing a just cause, no matter what you do to those people, they will not compromise. This is a cause that rightfully the entire Eritrean population were galvanized and realized that this is my cause. Right. We have been unfairly treated by Ethiopians or international community and what have you. So that is the motivating factor for every Eritrean in a way to be unified against the tyrants. Right. At that time, the monarchy, you can call it the military dictatorship. Yeah. And yeah, those two actually. So in that sense, yeah, the Eritreans were determined, to regain their dignity, and to gain their sovereignty, no matter what. And it was clear-cut violation, a very clear-cut violation. So in that sense, yeah. So I'm sure Ambazonia, from the little that I read, is similar. On the same day in 1961 October, where Ambazonia, or the southern Cameroon, that's what it was supposed to declare independence, and another proposal came, and from that day on, it just was a clear cut. Yeah. And I'm not sure that there's oil in southern Cameroon, right? Yeah. And one of the reason for the monarch of Ethiopia wanted to claim, historical ethnic is just a secondary issue. Main one was access to a sea. So access to a sea was the main issue. But at that time, the U.S. was also in favor of Ethiopia because of the Cold War era strategy. They got this, I believe, Radio Marina or some radio station, a base for the U.S. was granted by the monarchy, Haile Selassie himself. So as exchange for that favor, they just ignored the violation that has been going on in Eritrea for many years.
So you mean the U.S. had a radio station?
Base, actually.
Oh, a military base?
Military base, yeah.
In Ethiopia?
They call it Radio Communication Center in Eritrea.
Oh, in Eritrea.
In Eritrea, yeah. I think by the coast, and they also have a branch in the capital city. They call it Kanyo Station. Yeah. Yeah. This is as a result of the Second World War. Yeah. That came to the picture.
Wow, that's interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned the zeal of the Eritrean people because they saw injustice. Yeah. They saw that what was happening at the UN was unjust to them. What the monarch of Ethiopia was doing to them was unjust. But we also know that many Eritreans, yourself, for example, they left Eritrea, they went into the world, and they formed what we call the Eritrean diaspora, the Eritrean diaspora. So my question is, what was the main role of the Eritrean diaspora in fighting the war against Ethiopia? What role, what did they actually do to help Eritrea win?
Advance the cause?
Yeah.
First of all, they all believed in it. The violation was clear-cut, as I mentioned it to you earlier, and international community ignored it. So you have to rely on your own people, primarily, from inside as well as in diaspora. And Ethiopia, with all its numerical superiority, just like you said, you know, armaments and all that stuff, and those things can actually make you more determined to gain your dignity back. So Eritreans in diaspora, and the fact that Eritrea, relatively speaking, before the annexation of Eritrea with Ethiopia, relatively speaking, was a little more democratic. The civic groups were a little more developed. I'm talking about we had labor unions, we had a relatively free press, and you know, due to Italian colonialism, and after the Italian colonialism were defeated, the British opened the system a little bit wider. In comparison to Ethiopia, where the monarch was the ruler of the day. And you can easily tell, you know, when you're a monarch, you tend to be more repressive, and democratic rights were not there. So this composition produced a lot of open-minded Eritreans, intellectuals, who can advocate on behalf of Eritrea. So this may be the base for the diaspora community to come together and demand for a just cause.
That's very interesting because of, you know, the cultural heritage from Britain, you know, opening up. That's so very interesting. But then, you know, some people tend to categorize activists, even if they are acting on a just cause. Sometimes some people characterize them as terrorists, for example. So, did any of the Eritreans in the diaspora, did they get affected by this kind of classification? I mean, I'm asking because we're trying to see if Ambazonians who believe that they are fighting a just cause, do we have to be apprehensive about being called terrorists? Is that what some Eritreans went through? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, you're right, exactly. The Cold War era results, you know, and during the Cold War era, if you're not with us, you're with the enemy. So obviously, they will call you all kinds of names. If the U.S. is an ally of Ethiopia, the Eritreans are automatically a secessionist. Their agenda is to be separated, nothing more. Or to give them a worse name, you call them a terrorist. You know? So this is, but at the end of the day, the U.S. policy by itself, they see the reality on the ground. When the Eritreans were occupying more lands and were near to defeating the enemy, then the alliance switched. You're no more terrorist. You're no more secessionist. You're a liberation movement fighter, or a determined. I'm not sure exactly what they call it, but that switch always happens. You know, the secessionists. Of course, if you're a U.S. ally, you will be called the same thing. And if you're a Soviet, during the Cold War era, if you're with the Soviets, they praise you. But if you're against it, they'll call you a capitalist for that matter. So those labels are there, but that does not describe you. That does not reflect upon your movement. So those judgments, those labels, they're there.
Right. Now we'll just speed up a little bit, and I'll ask a question about the African Union, which is headquartered somehow in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So it took the African Union how long to recognize Eritrea, or to recognize that the Eritrean fight was a just one? It took them as long as, let's measure it in the number of people killed. 150,000 Eritreans lost their lives before this thing was stopped. Now, if you were advising the African Union about, like, the Ambazonian situation in Cameroon, what would you say to, like, maybe the African Union Secretary General, for example? What would you advise him as an Eritrean who has lived through that experience?
You know, this is interesting. Again, we can go back to when African Liberation Movement leaders won their independence. A lot of them, they won their independence through hard struggle. But once they got there, most of them turned into a dictator. And in every case, almost practically every, if not a dictator, they turned into a corrupt leaders. So according to the 1963 African Union resolution, which was in Addis Ababa, if I'm not mistaken, they were saying that the existing colonial countries would be considered as they are. So Eritrea was in 1961. They were incorporated with Ethiopia. So nobody wanted to raise that issue because it was forcefully incorporated in Ethiopia in 1961. Haile Selassie cut the ribbon and all that stuff. On Eritrean case, they were just silent. They did not say anything about that.
The African Union.
The African Union, yeah. And the host was the emperor, yeah. Obviously, there was no transparency, democratic procedures at that time. But most of them, they have their own national or ethnic or tribal issue as well. They're not going to talk about the AMBAZONIA. They're not going to talk about the Eritrean liberation movements because on their own country they have issues that they were suppressing ethnic or tribal movements or initiatives. So in that sense, I can see that the African Union was a little behind of their time. But I don't know, I'm not qualified to give advice to Ambazonia, but if I have to...
You have experience.
If I have to, you know, Eritrea can, you know, that is actually a wrong example. I was going to say Eritrea could be example, speak on behalf of...
Ambazonia.
Yeah, but
please.
We have our own tyrants, so,
yes.
So I'm not going to go there. But the issue has to come on the surface, you know?
Yeah.
Especially on 21st century, there are many ways that he can address the grievances of a nationalist movement or anybody who felt that they have been undermined,
yeah,
one way or the other.
But there's one thing that Eritrea has that Ambazonia doesn't have now. Eritrea has its sovereignty. To Ambazonians, that's a big achievement. It's a big,
yep,
huge, as some people would say. So, but coming to that level of sovereignty and then being accepted at the international level as a country, as a nation, a lot of sacrificing, thousands of people killed. But before that stage, I'm pretty sure, or I'll ask, were there like different groups and factions within the Eritrean liberation movements that were either working together or working maybe against each other? I mean, how do you describe what was really going on? I'm sorry to take you back.
No, this is, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
In fact, that is exactly true. There's a civil war in Eritrea among the liberation movements.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, by some account, some Eritreans will say Eritrean independence would have been realized in 1975. But imagine, from 75, it took another 15 years to actually declare it. And I would say, well, because of the differences between different factions, most of the time they were fighting each other. So it weakens the movement. It weakens the nationalist movement. This is one of them. And prior to that, the political differences. When the Italians departed and the British came, there was some elements, they call them unity for association with Ethiopia. There's a political party. And there's Eritreans who wanted strongly independence. Yeah. And actually at one time they created a bloc, they called them independent bloc. Yeah. So there was a rift between those two. And the monarchy used the one that says that promotes unity with association with Ethiopia. Yeah. Supported them and encouraged them. But, you know, with all fairness, there was assembly in Eritrea in 10 years, so independent bloc, I believe, they had 32 members, and for the association they had 32. Although, from what I heard, they did not assemble at the parliament more than 2 or 3 times. And once those unity with Ethiopia realized the sinister motive of the monarch, they distanced themselves. In fact, one of them who started the Eritrean Liberation Movement, they used to call them ELM, that then transformed into Eritrean Liberation Movement, ELF. But that's what the case during the peaceful transition, during the United Nations involvement. After that, there was 2 factions, Eritrean Liberation Front and Eritrean People's Liberation Front. They had their conflict within each other, and it dragged the day for liberation. Yeah.
Was there a situation where one of the movements just declared themselves as government?
By default, yes. Like I believe in 1980, the Eritrean Liberation, People's Liberation Movement front decided that the country cannot hold more than one group. So they got rid of the other one, they chased them away, and all of them, practically all of them, left the field and went to Sudan. From that day on, it was dominated by one political party. That is probably one of the reasons, since there's no check and balance or two perspective. After independence, the legacy was dictatorship. Yeah, dictatorship. So, we can talk about it later on if you want.
Wow. So, wow, that's interesting. Anyway, thank you so much, but I wouldn't let you go without talking about Ambassador Herman Cohen. I know you didn't probably do any research on him, but we're talking about the Ambassador Cohen just because he helped broker the peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia in the day. So the question is, would you recommend that kind of approach? Like Ambazonians should kind of look up to that kind of person to broker some kind of peace between Ambazonia and French Cameroon?
French Cameroon. I mean, any mediator may help, regardless, because when you're not recognized by nobody, the mediator may at least give you some spotlight in the international community or in the international media. Yeah. From what I recall, is Ambassador Cohen came at the last minute. Once they realized, I may be mistaken here, but once they realized that the military dictator of Ethiopia, Mengistu Haile Mariam, was about to be defeated, that's when their involvement came. Because the U.S., they had this wait-and-see attitude, who's going to take over. Yeah. And he came, and I guess he participated at the London conference. Yeah. And his understanding was like Eritrea will be part of the transitional government. It could be, probably that's what they talked about in London. But when the meeting came to Addis Ababa, Eritrea distanced itself. It said, no, we do not come for a transitional government. But the transition, they were not part of it, so they distanced themselves. The rest of the Ethiopians continue with the process. And Eritrea promised, or maybe dictated by others, that 2 years from that day, which is 1991 to 93, they conducted a referendum for independence. and the result was, I believe, 98.7 or something. Independence. Say, so that's how we was. But Ambassador Cohen, I've heard him talk on a few occasions. He brokered, yeah, he probably get them together in London. And I also heard some the military rulers, delegates, they were on YouTube recently. They were talking about the story behind it.
Yeah.
How he abandoned the Mengistu and ended up working with EPRDF and Eritrean People's Liberation Front representatives. So that's what it is. They realize that somebody's losing and somebody's winning. Yeah. So whose side are you going to take? The winner side. So.
Win, win, win.
Yeah. But for Ambazonia, your question, you have a solid case, a solid case. And in fact, I heard last year and a year before, there was a lot of demonstration, people were being killed. And actually, Nigeria also deported about 47, 48 members back to
the
Cameroons.
Those people are in the military court now.
Yeah, you see, that is not helping the cause at all. But in other words, maybe you guys can design your own strategy and learn from Eritrea. Yeah. Although it took 30 years. But if you don't mind, I also wanted to talk about what happened after independence.
Yes.
That Cameroonian must really pay attention.
Yes.
Especially the Ambazonia.
Yes.
When you conduct a liberation movement, it has to have a democratic nature into it. Yeah. So that you conduct a nationalist movement and neglecting other factors, what makes people, what takes you to a democratic and human with a rule of law and what have you. But when you start dominating the scene, and when you think that you're an invincible, so Eritrea, after 30 years of war, paying the price, 150,000, just like you said, 60,000 liberation movement fighters, guerrillas, passed during this movement. But after independence, what we see is another dictatorship. Yeah. In fact, it often is compared to the North Korea type of dictatorship. So it's one thing to conduct a nationalist movement, but it's another for the future of Cameroon. Yeah. What's going to happen? Is independence is the only factor for the liberation movement? No, I doubt it. So just like earlier we were talking about, most of the African countries during colonial, when they get rid of the colonial powers, they end up being a dictator. Yeah. Start from Sesego, Kaunda, and I mean, all of them. So unfortunately, even those movements, African movements, was fighting against another African, the fate's probably the same, unless we design a new strategy that encompasses rule of law, democracy, and a transparent system.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. My last question will just be a request.
Okay.
So are you willing to start up mobilization among Ethiopians and Eritreans in the U.S. to support Ambazonia's independence and a quick recognition of Ambazonia as a state with sovereignty and one of the states that is going to be part of the United Nations? And we want independence, we want rule of law, we want all those good things that we're talking about. We want no dictatorship.
No dictatorship.
Yeah. So that's my, I mean, is the Ambazonian story something that you can relate to other Ethiopians and Eritreans and they will understand what we are going through and actually support morally or otherwise?
I think the Ambazonian question, from a little I read, is a self-determination issue. They deserve the self-determination. As a result of that self-determination, I have to ask the Ambazonian people. Yes, I heard some professor was saying secession is out of the question. That is not up to me to recommend or to suggest. But I would say, yeah, those transparencies, those democratic procedures, rule of law has to be in place in Ambazonia. But would that go as far as independence? Does that go as far as federation, bringing back the 1961 type of federation with its fully respected factions, different factions, addressing their concern? And even if it takes up to independence, like in Eritrea in 1980, there was a proposal. There was autonomy, independence, and federation, stuff like that. Yeah. So, but the Derg, the military Derg, even that he would not accept it because that's not his nature to accept proposal like that. Yeah. It's not the democratic mind. But the same to Ambazonia. I personally, me and the producer Malik, will have guests from Ambazonia to this TV station, and that within that limited ability, we can do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. And any delegates that you have in town, speakers, this is your platform.
Thank you so very much.
No
It's a beautiful day for Ambazonia, because I can say here now that the connection between the two peoples of Eritrea, their struggle, their independence, their post-independence dictatorship, the ending of that dictatorship, re-establishment of relations with Eritrea, even at the level of citizens, families, meeting each other and embracing, hugging each other. It's exactly what we in Africa need. Ambazonians need that. Hundreds, I can say thousands of Ambazonians have been killed by government bullets in the Cameroons. That is a fact that even the United Nations knows. There is more than 50,000 refugees that have gone into Nigeria. Inside Cameroon itself, I think they have estimated more than 1 million to 2 million internally displaced people. And all that, for what? It's my question. I always ask this. I'm like, why are African people not in the business of production, but just in the business of suffering and creating more suffering? That's my question, and I hardly ever get any answer. But, talking with you today and learning a little bit about Eritrean struggle, it's giving me some hope. And I really hope that, for me personally, I just want the killing to stop. People can talk as much as they want, but killing should stop. How do you think we can stop this killing? That's a big question.
The killing, well, it's so difficult. It takes two to tango. If the resistance is peaceful, but the other side is not willing to come halfway, the killing will not stop. The Cameroonian government, as far as, again, as little that I know, Paul Biya. Paul Biya has been in power for almost 36 years as a president. Prior to that, he was a prime minister.
You know more than I.
Prior to that, he was a secretary. So since 1968, the man was there in power, one way or the other, and 36 years as a president. And you don't expect much concession from a person like him. Eritrean president, he was there for the 27 years. Yeah, and the last question you were asking me, I'm sorry, because of my mind was going all over. I did not answer. Is no, actually, you did an introduction that Ethiopia and Eritrea were reconciling.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I can say it too.
Please.
Okay, that is very tricky. The Ethiopian Eritrean peace and reconciliation, take the reconciliation part out. The only thing that happens is the Ethiopian government declared peace. On the ground, nothing materialized. I'll start. Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. When a person talks about nationalism, there's many other aspects and factors that needs to strengthen that nationalism.
Yes.
Democracy, transparency, and all that stuff. Then you can call it complete. You know, the whole thing is complete. Between Ethiopia and Eritrea is suddenly this guy came and said, no more war. And Olive Branch came and started hugging our dictator. But as an Eritrean, when we look at it, yeah, of course, peace, nobody hates peace. We have to have that peace. And I'm glad there's no more fighting, there's no more AK-47, you know, there's no more killing, there's no more imprisonment. But what happened is, within Ethiopia, they have their own politics. They did not solidify power now. The people of Ethiopia is still divided. In fact, it's even more dangerous in the long run. This is my opinion, you know, between the Tigrayan Wayane, which was a previous administration, versus the new one, Oromos versus Amhara, federal system versus the secular system and all that stuff. This is a time bomb. But I'm hoping that they can resolve it. But when you endorse a dictator like the Eritrean dictator, who imprisoned his own comrades for 17 years, and nobody knew where they are, that is crazy. Some of them, they fought in a jungle for 30 years with him. Some of them joined the movement before him. There's no single independent media in Eritrea.
For real?
No. In fact, 15 of the journalists were in jail since 1917. Again, nobody knew where they are. Human rights violation, religious persecution. And all this is happening in Eritrea. And when you see them two hugging each other and giving him a promissory ring and all that stuff, on the ground, nothing has changed. Eritrea is the highest refugee producer per capita. Yeah, about 5,000 refugees leave their country on a monthly basis. Not to mention that they were subjected to indefinite national service. Some of them served the country for 15 years. I just want to highlight those things. So it's good, like maybe tomorrow morning when AMBAZONIA became independent, you may deal with the Republic of the French-speaking. You may make peace, but when you do that peace, it should not be symbolic, it should not be for the consumption of the outside world.
Yeah.
It has to have humanity, it has to have that image ingrained into people's communication. But right now, the two relationship, they need to work on it, and you don't disavow the fact that there's peace, but nothing has started, and nothing is materialized so far. Yeah, I forget about it. I mentioned it, so I just
that's an important thing.
I had to plug that in.
That's an education for people who really want to understand what the politics or the socio-politics of Eritrea, and because, like I was saying before we started recording, a lot of Africans don't know these things.
No,
they don't, because it's not on cable TV. People don't flip around and then they'll see a story about Eritrea, you know. Forget about AMBAZONIA. I mean, we're still struggling. But even just to know what is going on in Africa now, few Africans really, really know. Maybe I'm just talking about myself.
No, it's true. Not a lot of.
But one thing I know about Africa is that it's 11 million square miles. It's huge. It's big. So if you want to know what is in 11 million square miles, you need to have a very big head. Okay,
it's true, to carry all that.
Carry all that information. Anyway, so that was Beyond the Headlines.
Yes.
Is that's the program? And talking there My name is Ken Wanaku, by the way, talking there with Petros Haile, who actually is the host of this program. And we have gone through the history of the Eritrean independence and liberation movements and the post-independence situation in Eritrea and relationships with Ethiopia, which several years ago was the aggressor. And we compared all of this with what is going on in the Cameroons. The Cameroons, at this point, most of us who are from the English-speaking part of Cameroons believe that there is a case of genocide that is going on now, that the government of the Republic of Cameroons is using arms, using guns on civilians who are not armed, and they have burned down at least 160 villages, according to records by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. They have all those records. I'm not making up anything here. So actually the government of Cameroon is guilty of killing its own citizens or killing citizens of English-speaking zones of Cameroon. And the citizens of the English-speaking zone of Cameroon, we call that area AMBAZONIA. We have gone back to the United Nations and asked them to revisit the independence process and to make sure that this slice of land that is in the Gulf of Guinea that has 8 million Africans can actually become independent. And we're very grateful for Tempo Afrique TV for giving us the opportunity here in the program Beyond the Headlines to make this point. And thank you so much for being with us today. And Mr. Petros Haile, especially, thank you.
Thank you.
And behind the scenes, we know Malik is there, the engineer, everything engineer, making all of this possible. Thank you so very much. And please come back to this channel.